Hey. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Can We Please Talk podcast. As always, I'm Mike Leon.
And I'm Nick Saveri.
Folks, we've got a fantastic show for everybody today. We've got a fantastic topic that I think. But first, Nicholas, my friend, how are you, sir?
I'm tired, man.
It's just coming out right with it. You're tired.
Of course, it's been a day, man. My wife's working today, so I'm working as well because obviously I'm full time. But
right.
I also got my two little babies at home. One's not so much a baby; she's 6 years old. But between her and virtual school, and I've got the actual baby who's 14 months, and some more teeth coming in. It's wild, man. It's wild up in here. So it's been a day. So I'm looking forward to getting a little bit of time to rest up at some point and get ready for the madness again tomorrow. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I think that's what people don't understand. The two of us, we both have daytime jobs, families. So both of our offices are still virtual. Nobody is returning. So, you got the craziness at home, and then you and I, venture off in the evenings where we record and have guests on and things like that. So it's almost like we've got a full daytime action packed, and then we get out into our nighttime programming, and that's you and I being able to record. So I'm doing good, man, adjusting back to New York City, and got to take the little one out to Times Square today so she can see what Iron Man looks like, or at least, somebody impersonating Iron Man. She doesn't know the difference yet, but she did run up to him. So I was like,
at least she likes the characters. I like that.
Right. But I was like, let's sanitize. As we shift into our topic for today, because we've got a fantastic topic for today, we're going to dive deep into it with a former friend of mine who used to work with me at MSG. But we really want to touch on representation in media and sports. A few weeks ago, Nick found an article on the Black Girls Hockey Club. If you don't know about this club, it's a group of black women that are into the sport, and there's not that much representation in the NHL. We know about this of the few amount of African-American players that play in the National Hockey League. So this group was started to kind of, gather fans together, specifically African-American women that wanted to go to games, teach younger kids in communities of color about the game. And Nick happened to find this article and he sends it to me. And I said, hey, I actually know somebody who produced that piece on them back in Madison Square Garden years ago. And that was Lakia Holmes, who's our guest for tonight. Lakia has a fantastic story, not only in broadcasting and media herself. She's worked almost everywhere at NFL Network. You may have seen her on Kyle Brand's Football Experience show that used to air at 6 p.m. She's now at Bleacher Report as a senior producer. She's worked on Taylor Rooks' show on Bleacher Report. She's worked on Untold Stories, if you follow them on Instagram. So a lot of the pieces where they're telling stories with Terrell Owens, that was her producing and editing those pieces. So she's going to tell us not only about her career and journey in broadcasting from the lens of what it is to be an African-American female in today's broadcast world, but the real story about the representation and what the Black Girls Hockey Club wants to do in terms of, getting minorities and communities of color more involved in sports that they're not typically known for. Nick, I know you love obviously this topic. I just mentioned that you found this article about them and thought it was so fascinating, and how can we get Lakia on or somebody from the group? So give us your take a little bit about the overall topic and theme.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always drawn to just stories about subcultures, just groups of people that come together for a common cause that we normally wouldn't expect. So, here I am reading this article about a group of black women who are just drawn to the sport of hockey. And I'm in, from standpoint of representation as a brown person, specifically, I'm Indian, where there's an opportunity to see more people of color being represented in, popular culture, be in sports and what have you. I'm always passionate about that. So when I read this piece, I'm just blown away. I like, A, this group sounds amazing. B, they're doing incredible work. And that's, one of the reasons, Mike, you and I started the show was to bring to light really interesting people and really interesting stories. And when I read that, I said, we got to talk to these folks. Somehow we got to find out more about the BGHC, Black Girls Hockey Club. And hear more about how this group came about, what has been the impact of that of the group on the sport. We saw actually last year when a lot of professional sports organizations took a pause from playing games, to recognize police brutality. And the NHL was, to their credit, a league that you wouldn't necessarily think would get brought into a conversation of social injustice, but they stood up, or more specifically, they took a knee and recognized injustice and wanted to bring light to that. For a sport that has very low representation of people of color, specifically Black people, to see that the league recognized the importance of being a part of that dialogue was awesome to see. And as a person who's a very, very casual hockey fan, to hear specifically about Black women getting into the sport, or being a part of the sport, and already starting to travel to different facilities, stadiums, and meet players. There's something really powerful about people of color finding a space where previously representation has not been in place, and being able to represent themselves. I think that means a lot to the organization, and it means a lot to casual fans like myself to see non-white people getting engaged into a sport that previously didn't feel like a space for people of color.
Yeah. No, it's well said, because as somebody, Hispanic male myself, I'm very big into hockey. I'm a diehard Islanders fan. Not that many Hispanics that obviously are in the National Hockey League first and foremost, but even fewer that are probably into the game. Obviously, we're known for baseball and other warmer sports, but it is one of the things that Hallie Ledbetter that was on our program a while back. The former golfer, collegiate golfer, national champion golfer, and she's at Golf Digest now telling these type of stories as well for African Americans and minorities that have gotten into golf. And she said it's one of those things where if people don't see it, they think, well, then it's not for me because there's nobody that looks like me that's in it. And so I love the story of what the Black Girls Hockey Club is doing. I also love what Lakia has done in media and television. And, I've worked with her for years. I've known her for a long time. So super proud of what she's been able to accomplish in her career. We are so excited and can't wait to talk to her today. All right, Nick. Like we mentioned at the top, this is a good friend of mine, and I hope she's still a good friend of mine after this airs. She is a senior producer at Bleacher Report. You have seen some of her work, like Untold Stories she has helped produce, Take It There with Taylor Rooks. You may have catched her on the Kyle Brandt Football Experience on NFL Network. She's been in television for so long, you can hardly remember. And that is Lakia Holmes. Lakia, Mike Leon, Nick Savari, thank you so much for hopping on the program with us today.
Hey, how are you? How are you guys doing?
We are doing good. New York City is buzzing in the background for the people that can hear that. I'm so appreciative of you coming on the program today, because before you hopped on, we talked about what the topic was going to be, really about representation, not only in media, but the stuff with the Black Girls Hockey Club and a piece that you produced on them years ago. So before we dive into the topic, I want to ask you off the bat and give our audience a chance to kind of familiarize themselves with you. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what made you want to get into television, media, and producing.
That's a great question. My earliest memories growing up is either watching sports or watching news. And so pretty much my entire childhood, I knew I wanted to go into news. And at one point I wanted to go into become a war correspondent. So a lot of my growing up was watching World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. And so seeing Christiane Amanpour and all those guys and women down in the trenches, I'm a child of the 80s. So, growing up watching the Iraq War, and then all of the incidents that were going on in Yugoslavia back in those days. So that was what was originally going to be my goal in life. And I was in college. I went to Brigham Young University, and I needed some extra credits. And so a friend of mine told me about a sports broadcasting and production class. And so I was like, well, I like sports. I watch sports all the time. So let me just take the class and see what that's about. And so as part of the class, we had to do 15 hours of work on BYU's live game broadcasts. And so that was where I could really get hands-on with the production side. And so I was like, wow, well, I can take my love of sports and then just do that. And so that was essentially when I made the pivot into sports broadcasting and production.
First and foremost, as a BYU grad, shout out number 2 in the draft, Zach Wilson coming to the Jets. As a at BYU, predominantly a white school. I mean, just to name it here. What was that experience being a Black woman in a predominantly white space like that, BYU?
It was challenging at times, but it's honestly an experience that I wouldn't trade because it helped open my eyes, because I'm born and raised in New York City, one of the most diverse places on the planet, basically. And so to go from that to Provo, Utah, now I will say I'm Mormon, so that helps the transition a little bit, helps make the transition a little easier. But it's always weird when you're on a campus of 30 some odd thousand students and you're one of 175 Black people. And so, I remember my freshman year, my first semester, I was in a sociology class, and the chapter on race and ethnicity comes up. And so you just know someone's going to say something reckless. Like it's like a train that you're just waiting, it's going to show up on time. And sure enough, some kids would make some comments, and, you don't necessarily want to spend your entire time kind of serving as like making this a teachable moment, but you kind of do find yourself in those positions where you're just trying to explain to people why certain things are offensive or insensitive. And honestly, there were kids at BYU who I was the first Black person they had seen in person, because they came from, a small town in Idaho or Wyoming or something like that. And so they just didn't have all their experience was television. And so, we talk about representation within media. And so I remember another freshman year incident in a geography class, and it came up that I was from New York City. And after class, this kid comes up to me and he was like, "So you're from New York City, you said, right?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, you said you're from Harlem, right?" It's like, "Yeah." He was like, "So have you ever been shot?" And I stopped. Exactly. And so I stopped and I was like, "What?" He was like, "Well, have you ever been shot?" It's like, isn't it, just like, you step out your door and there's just bullets whizzing past you and stuff. And it's like, I grew up on like a nice tree-lined street in Harlem, not Baghdad. Like, what are we talking about? But again, because all he's seen in media is violence and just negativity and things like that. And so they just automatically assume that that's what the world is like. And so I would often find myself in moments like that where it's like, no, it's not like that. I come from a pretty middle class, neighborhood. I've never been shot at. I've never shot anyone, because that's another question that came up as part of that conversation. So it's just like opening people's eyes to things like that is draining at times, but you find yourself in those positions where you just constantly have to educate.
Lakia, first off, I didn't know any of that. I mean, I'm blown away by the first two answers, because obviously I mentioned at the top that you and I worked together at MSG. So to know that you always wanted to work in news journalism, which is something that I started out in, is awesome to hear. But then I've always wondered what it was like for you at BYU, being predominantly white school. But now I want to get into, because now you start transitioning your career. You wanted to be on camera, and then you found yourself working in different sports newsrooms, for lack of a better term, from ESPN to Madison Square Garden to now Bleacher Report. Has anything changed, in your opinion, over the years, especially just what you talked about, right? We saw the civil unrest and the social injustices that are happening. For the people that are watching on video, obviously you're wearing a Black Women Matter t-shirt. For the people on audio that can't see that. So What has changed, in your opinion, over the years that you've been in media, as you've gone from newsroom to newsroom? Has it become more diverse? Are you seeing more people that look like you, or do you still think that we're not there yet?
We've come, I think, a considerable ways in the, 10 plus years since I graduated, but I think there's still so much further to go. I remember just making the transition from MSG to Bleacher, and I think I could probably count the number of Black people, let alone Black women at MSG on one hand. And when I made the transition to Bleacher, it was a lot more diverse, but it still is nowhere, I think, representative of just sports as a whole. We talk a lot about, how, these leagues that all of these sports entities cover, for the most part, are majority Black athletes, but you don't see those same, numbers when it comes to outlets who are covering these teams and these leagues. And so it's gotten better. I think everything that happened last year with the Black Lives Matter movement and all these companies kind of having their racial reckonings, they've made it a point to be better about diversity and inclusion, and starting different initiatives and really taking a look at the way they do their hiring practices and stuff like that. So there are incremental changes, but I think there's still so much further to go in terms of really finding that balance, not just for Black people in media, but especially Black women, I think.
Coming from the experience of the past year, you were just mentioning, what potential practices there could be, what shifts need to be made in the culture of newsrooms in general, both sports and outside of the world of sports. What are some things that come up for you that you define as important to ensure that you are embracing the views and opinions of people of color, specifically Black women in this example? What are things that you identify as priorities that organizations can do to get better?
I think the biggest thing is just where's your candidate pipeline coming from? I've gone through my fair share of low paying jobs and jobs that I was not underqualified, overqualified for, but because of, the business that it is, it's hard to break through. There were so many positions where I was just trying to get my foot in the door, and it's like, oh, well, you're overqualified for this, but you need more experience. And it's like, okay, well, which one is it? And so I think it's looking at the pipelines, looking at where you're actively recruiting talent from. I'm a member of the National Association of Black Journalists. It's going to conventions like that, where you can actively find and recruit diverse voices. And it's not just about, just plucking someone who knows someone and, that familiarity. Yes, there is some value in that and having a connection and stuff, but it's just how broad of that net is it that you're casting? And so, I think a lot of companies are taking a look at, okay, well, let's make sure that, a certain percentage of our candidates fit this box. I think, something similar to like the Rooney Rule in the NFL, where it's like, well, you have to at least interview one minority candidate. And that's a start, but ultimately you're still seeing the same types of people being hired. And so it's just trying to change that mindset and just finding diverse voices, different perspectives. Because, not all people of color are monolith, like my experience as a Black woman is going to be completely different from an experience of another Black woman. It's just because we're both Black women, it doesn't mean we're all going to see everything the same way. So just having that diversity of thought and opinion can really help take your newsroom or your organization to the next level. But it's making sure that you're doing the work as an HR or, as an organization, to making sure that you're actively finding and reaching out to these people and saying like, hey, we value your opinion. We value what you bring to the table. And then also just making sure that you're paying those people competitively, you're paying them well. So that way, you can bring them in. And then also just fostering an environment where you're nurturing them to move up within the organization. It's one thing to bring people in on like the ground level, but if you're not doing anything to foster their professional development and put them in positions to succeed, they're going to grow frustrated, and they're going to go to the next place where they feel like they can get that fostering, that mentoring. And so I think those are some of the things that companies are looking at now and starting to figure out, okay, well, what do we need to do to be on the right side of history, basically.
Speaking of diversity of thought, how about some diversity of sport? See what I did there?
Oh, look at that. It's a little segue.
That's pretty good. I gave him a 7 out of 10 on that.
Yeah. We'll edit it out. But so, Lakia, obviously, I didn't even mention this at the top, but you've worked at Major League Baseball as well, or at least with Major League Baseball. You're into hockey, and you've stumbled upon this Black Girls Hockey Club, which Nick found an article about them and said, hey, man, I would love to talk to either the club or and I said, hey, I know somebody that's produced a piece on these women. So obviously the NHL has not so much, they struggle with diversity, obviously, just by the sheer numbers of the amount of African-American or people of color that play the sport, but that are also in the NHL. So first, tell us a little bit about the Black Girls Hockey Club, like their overall mission and goal, and why you wanted to do a story about them, what resonated, obviously, besides, being a Black woman that loves the sport.
Well, I first found out about Black Girl Hockey Club just randomly on Twitter. They were the club's founder, Renee. She had posed a question on Twitter, just kind of trying to get a gauge of just how many Black women were out there on social media who were fans. And so that was how I was first introduced. And I just started following them on Twitter. Just, I like hockey. When I was working at MSG, watched a ton of hockey and really got to learn more and appreciate the game a lot more. And so, I'd go to Ranger games, and more often than not, I'm like the only brown person in, my section and things like that. And so to see a group of women who have, come together on their own to, create a space basically for themselves, because they, felt like they just weren't being represented broadly. So they come together, they talk hockey on social media. They would have these meetups where, they'll go to different games together. Sometimes people fly in from different cities to take part in these meetups. And so it was so interesting to just, again, see that sense of community. And so what happened was they were having a meetup in the New York area at a Ranger game. And so I just started making some calls and just saying like, hey, we'd love to just, sit in with you guys on this game and do a feature and just get to know you more and your mission. And they're doing a lot of great work, especially with grassroots initiatives and just supplying scholarships and things like that to young Black girls across the country who want to go and play hockey. And hockey is a very expensive sport. So that oftentimes limits, Black people and other people of color, just the opportunity to be able to play. And so, they're trying to do their part to just, help foster an environment for young Black girls who want to play hockey, but just don't necessarily have the resources. So there's scholarships and, they've done partnerships and things with various teams within the league. So again, it's just fostering that sense of community and through that shared love of the game. And it's been really interesting to see just in the, 2.5, maybe 3 years since I first found out about them, just to see how much they've grown. And that's just a testament again to, community. And again, you'll probably hear me say that word a lot during this conversation. It's because, there's strength in numbers. And as Black women, we're so often find ourselves in spaces where we just don't feel like we belong. And so to be able to go to a game, a Rangers, Capitals game, for example, with a bunch of people who look like you, sound like you, talk like you, have the same experiences, things like that, to be able to come together to just watch hockey and just foster that sense of love and togetherness and community within each other has been really, really special to see.
As you were reporting on the organization, what was one of the most surprising things you learned in the process of developing that feature and getting to know the women?
That they had felt unseen for so long. These are people who, there were some women who, are new to the game, who are learning about the game. But then you had people who've been fans nearly their entire lives, and they've always found themselves as the token Black person, whether it's at a game or, on, some at a sports bar or something, to, come together to watch a game or things like that. And so, just, to see how happy they were to have other people to just talk to, whether even it's just on Twitter, just talking back and forth, just share. And these are women who know the game, they know the game inside and out. And it was interesting being at the Garden and kind of seeing them interact with people around them. And it's like, oh, wow, you really do like hockey. You really do know and understand the game. And it's like, well, yeah, So I think that was the biggest thing for me, just to get a sense of just how bonded they are through hockey. And, these are professional women who love the sport and want to help grow and foster love for the sport in other people. And so they're just using their platform in tremendous ways. And again, the support that they're getting from like the NHL and from the individual teams, because these teams and these leagues understand the value in that as well. And so they're doing what they can to, help again foster that sense of community, whether it's through certain activations that they're doing on the team level. Because a lot of these teams will be like, yeah, come bring Black Girl Hockey Club to our game. We'll make it an incredible experience for you. We'll get you behind the scenes. We'll, try to introduce you to some of these players. So the club is working with these team community, engagement, personnel and things like that to just help make the experience extra special for them. And that love is just going to just circle through their families and through their friends, and then just create, again, a pipeline of hockey fans, of Black women hockey fans, that's just going to hopefully continue to grow.
Lakia, when we, as you were mentioning all of that, I think about what happened last summer. We talked about, obviously the murder of George Floyd and all of the leagues and the stoppages. The last league to kind of, do something was the NHL, and they got a lot of flack for it. And obviously, they have a few African-American players in the league, one that's actually half Filipino and Black. So your thoughts first on what you think about when teams and leagues make statements. And do you feel like the NHL has done enough to make it? Because obviously it's the sport that's known for as being predominantly white. Maybe Major League Baseball is right after that, but hockey has this, distinction of being predominantly white. So when that happened last summer, they took a lot of flack for not at least catching up with the rest of the leagues in terms of making a message or participating in the boycott.
And I think we even saw just a couple of weeks ago with the verdict in relation to the Derek Chauvin trial, where again, the NHL, people are, criticizing the NHL for their relatively brief statement. But I think that these leagues in some ways are kind of in a damned if they do, damned if they don't situation. And, like we can even look at the Raiders tweet that came out after after the trial verdict.
Lakia, why? Yeah. Why? It's a sore spot for us. We're both Raiders fans.
It's a sore spot, but it's an important one to speak to.
We are going to do an episode on public relations. And that's why I asked the question, because it feels like whenever these events happen, right, and you just mentioned it, it's like if they don't make a statement, they didn't make a statement. Then they do make a statement. And it's like,
well, hey, I don't like that statement.
Correct.
You that statement was too short. You didn't say this specifically. You didn't. Yeah.
Correct. And we've seen the Rangers and Knicks get that type of heat here in New York City. So it's like, well, which one is it? If they make a statement and then it's like, do I need a team to tell me that what they saw on video of that murder was bad? Like, I know it's bad. You should already, say that that's bad, but you don't have to tell me. I'm at a loss, but the NHL, I feel like, got the most flack last year, specifically because the boycotts happened all on that one day, and the NHL was like, "No, we're playing tonight. We'll do a moment of silence," and then the next day, they stopped the rest of the league. So, do you feel like the league is at least addressing some of those issues? Are there issues other than representation in the sport?
Well, I will first say I'm not so much a fan of the statement. Like, show me what it is you're doing. Like, what are the actions? Like a statement, it's nice. It's putting maybe a small band-aid over it. So show me what you're doing. So I think that's the first thing. So again, to that point, like these leagues are kind of damned if they do, damned if they don't. So I think, these leagues are trying to figure it out as best as possible. But again, this is another example of representation within these teams and within these leagues in terms of having other people, other voices in the room to say, hey, this statement might skew a little bit more this way. This statement might skew a little bit more that way. So to just have someone to be able to flag these things and just be like, well, wait a second, we might want to take a step back. I think is so valuable. And so, these leagues really have to take a look again at who they're hiring. Who are these people in these rooms who are writing these statements, who are signing off on these statements and letting these statements fly. And so that's going to be the biggest thing, because, it's always good to do a heat check, in my opinion, and just say like, hey, how does this sound? So the NHL, they find themselves in a sticky situation just because of the numbers that you were talking about before. I don't know, what the numbers are in terms of like PR and, communications teams, but it wouldn't shock me if it wasn't, if it wasn't very high. So those are things that leagues are going to have to look at. It's like, okay, well, we're gonna put out these statements because we want to show that we're doing stuff, but do you have the right voices in the room to help you with these statements? And oftentimes they don't. And so, that's where you'll see the contention kind of come in, where it's like, well, you're addressing things, but you're not necessarily addressing the right things, and you're not saying enough, or you're saying a little too much, or maybe you shouldn't have said that at all. And so it just becomes a giant mess. And frankly, it's a performative mess. We've heard that word a lot over, I think, the last year. And so, you have to show that you're about something, that you're doing something, but it's often not in the greatest ways.
Well, it seems to be that, and you were talking about this earlier, that it's not enough to also rethink hiring practices, because you could easily have a situation where you have, more Black voices in the room, but the voices aren't being heard. And now suddenly it's for aesthetics purposes. Like, well, we have, like, I forgot who, it might be someone at Bleacher Report, it might be Mike Freeman. Someone had pointed out that, at the NFL draft, when you're looking at the draft rooms and you're looking at the makeup of ownership, GMs, coaches, there's hardly any Black people there. But then conversely, if there are those people the decision makers? To your point, it's not just being the person who writes the copy, if you are for the
Right.
Raiders in that case, but the person who actually stamps on that and says like that is appropriate, or what the hell are you all doing?
Yeah, it's just, I've worked in so many places, and it's like, it's almost, we hear about that glass ceiling, or it's like the ceiling is capped like right here. And so certain companies, like once you get to maybe like a director level, there's no one of color above that. And that's a real issue because, again, these are people whose voices need to be heard, who have experience, but are just not being afforded the opportunities. And these organizations, these companies are losing out on the tremendous amounts of perspective that they bring to the table. And so it's just fostering an environment of inclusivity. But again, to your point, like you said, it's not just, to just check off a box, to just have the person in the room to say that, yeah, we have someone in the room, but are you letting them speak? Do they feel empowered enough to speak and to offer their opinions and suggestions? And are you actively listening to them and taking what they're saying into consideration? And more often than not, there are people aren't being put in those positions to succeed. And again, that's where professional development lies. Again, it's like empowering them, making them feel like, okay, yeah, I have a voice, I can use it, and I can be respected for my perspective, for my voice. But like you're saying, the people who are signing off on these decisions, if they all look a certain way, it's not really helping anyone, because they're just kind of just in their tunnel vision. They don't necessarily have the value of the perspective to be able to help advance the conversation in meaningful ways.
Lakia, if you could go back in time to that 18 to 21-year-old Lakia on the campus of BYU, or even that up and coming next Lakia that wants to work in media, like you mentioned, and is a Black female, doesn't know how to navigate those waters, what's a piece of advice you would give to that person?
I've learned so much over my time. I think the biggest thing is find a great mentor. Find someone who's, for me, I have so many Black women mentors within the industry that I look up to and that I can go to for advice. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be someone who's further along in their career. I find myself having mentor-mentee relationships with people who are essentially on the same level as me career-wise, because we've all had different experiences at different stops along the way that a lot of us, it's like, wait, that happened to you too? And so just to have those people to lean on, to talk to kind of help you navigate, that to me has been the biggest help, is someone that I can just talk to and just not necessarily vent, but someone who will listen and say, hey, something like this happened to me. Here's how I was able to navigate. And just having those types of relationships helps so much. And also just joining professional organizations. I think sometimes students will wait until they've gotten their first job to join a professional organization like an NABJ. But if you can join something like that on the high school level or the college level, just to help start fostering those bonds and making those connections, because as we all know, working in this industry, it's all about networking and just making yourself, visible. So joining professional organizations, within NABJ, I'm a member of the sports task force. So it's like I'm part of an organization within an organization. So that's been super beneficial for me. So that's the biggest thing that I tell my students that I talk to, that I mentor, just taking advantage of those resources will help you so much when it comes to just growing and learning within your career field.
Okay, well said. Great advice as my voice cracks there because I'm super proud of you. I've known you for years and hired you at MSG because I saw something in you. You're immensely talented, and Bleacher Report is super lucky to have you. Check out all of Lakia's work at Bleacher Report, from Untold Stories. Take it there with Taylor Rook. She's working on something new that she's going to tell us about on Patreon, so you can head over to the Patreon portion of this. Lakia Holmes, thank you so much for being on the program today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's great to catch up with you.
That was senior producer at Bleacher Report, one of my oldest friends, Lakia Holmes. Check out all of Lakia's work over at Bleacher Report, all the shows that she's worked on. You can even check her out at lakiaholmes.com. Some of the work that she's done at NFL Network, Major League Baseball, ESPN, Bleacher Report, like I mentioned. And then also check out the Black Girls Hockey Club, folks. They are doing such a great job of not only getting groups involved in the sport, at the grassroots level, like Lakia mentioned, but knowledge transfer of what it is to root for an NHL team, the rules of the game. So much going on there. I love the articles that have come out about the group and what the group has been doing. And I love seeing people that look like myself, that look like Lakia, that are interested in a sport that's always had this stigma of being, white only or predominantly white. So Nick, what were some of your takeaways from the conversation with Lakia about representation overall in these different spaces?
You sounded the best. I think the work for telling the story of Black Girls Hockey Club, which is what kind of inspired today's episode. I think she weaved that story, how putting that feature together connects to even her own experience, being a Black Mormon, attending BYU, just all of it weaves together beautifully and just tells us just the value of representation and the importance of the work that she's doing, and all the awesome stuff that's happening at Bleacher Report.
Yeah, check out Bleacher Report is one of my favorite sports apps. But you can check out all of Lakia's work, like I mentioned, lakiaholmes.com. For all of the .com work that we do, youtube.com. Nick is pointing down, smashing the subscribe button. Please subscribe, follow us on YouTube for all the video clips of all of our interviews. At Patreon, Can We Please Talk podcast. If you go into our episode notes or series notes, as Nick gives you the dollar bill signs that Randy Moss was pointing to when he wanted to get paid contractually.
Straight cash on.
Straight cash on me. That's right. You can head to our Patreon page and find out more excerpts from all of our interviews, all this bonus content. You can listen to Lakia talk about what it was like to work for me back at MSG and how I mentored her and how I Simonized my halo after that conversation.
I got clapped for talking about baseball.
Correct. Right. You get where we get clapped because Nick hates baseball now. I just found out.
I'm a lost person without the sport. I'm just trying to come back. Lakia was helping me. You cut into that. You know what? You all have to get to Patreon to hear how that conversation went down.
That is true. Head over to Patreon. Can We Please Talk podcast for our episode as well. Audio platforms, you know them by now. The Google, Spotify's, the Apples of the world. Continue the conversation with us. Email us at canwepleasetalkpodcast@yahoo.com. We would love to hear your thoughts, not only on this topic, but some of the other topics that we've performed on the show and have had guests on from the show. If you've got a show idea for us, shoot us an email. In our episode notes page, you can always find our email, canwepleasetalkpodcast@yahoo.com, or follow us on social at Can We Please Talk Podcast on IG and TikTok, and at Can We Please Talk on Twitter. As always, I'm Mike Leon.
Grateful to be your partner. I'm Nick Saveri.
I mean, I don't even know how to end it like that, but that was a good ending. We're not going to clip it. We've got too much invested in it. Thank you for that, Nick. I really appreciate it. That was a great way to end it. All right.
Always, brother.
Have a good one.